They said Tywin Lannister never smiled, that his gold was cold, his pride colder, and his heart was stone. What they didn't say, what no one even whispered, was that he wasn't truly a Lannister at all. Not by blood, not by fire, only one. Man alive knew the truth, and even he doubted it sometimes, tried to drown it in wine or bury it in the bodies of whores he strangled when memory clawed back into his mind. But Varys never forgot anything. And on the eve of the new king's coronation, the spider spun a web so fine it could only catch dragons. King's Landing reeked of smoke and piss as usual. Yet beneath the Red Keep, deep in the bowels of the city, a secret chamber echoed with footsteps that hadn't been heard in years. Varys, wrapped in silks and shadows, walked alone, holding in his hand a single scroll that had been hidden inside. The black cells sealed with wax and the sigil of the Mad King himself. "Tywin Lannister," Varys muttered, unrolling the brittle parchment. "You were never meant to serve the crown, you were born to wear it." He remembered the whispers from his days in Essos, the rumors, laughed off as drunken nonsense, that during Aerys's first rebellion of the flesh, long before Rhaella, had been locked away from him. He had visited Casterly Rock under the guise of peace. Tywin's mother had been ill, frail, and Lord Tytos, well, everyone knew the old lion had no spine and even less pride. One night. That's all it took. 9 months later, Tywin Lannister was born with golden hair, yes, but with eyes just a shade too light. Eyes that turned cold, not arrogant. A stare that didn't carry pride, it carried judgment. The truth was locked away by Grand Maester Pycelle, eager to please both lions and dragons. The Maester had been present at birth, and he had known, but secrets have weight, and Pycelle, who bent for every king, was crushed by them before he died. Tywin Lannister stood over the corpse of King Aerys II, blood still cooling on his blade. His armor was polished gold, but there was something in his eyes that day, a flicker of pain buried deep. He had been Hand of the King for 20 years, yet as he looked down at the Mad King's twisted face, he felt nothing like triumph, only disgust, and something else. A tiny crack in the wall he had built inside himself, because in that moment he realized he had killed his own father. But Tywin told no one. He burned the evidence, silenced every mouth, and poured all of his hatred into reshaping the realm in his image. A realm of order, of discipline. No fire, no madness, but fire cannot be denied. Years passed. Robert Baratheon ruled, then Joffrey, then chaos again. And through it all, Tywin remained the one man who could bend kings and break armies with a single look. Even dragons, had they still lived, might have bowed to him, until the day Tyrion Lannister put a crossbow bolt through his chest while he sat on a latrine. That should have been the end. But some secrets survive even death. When Varys delivered the scroll to Daenerys Stormborn, sailing east, plotting her return, it shook the last living Targaryen to her core. Tywin Lannister was one of us, she whispered, hands trembling. But he hated us. He butchered Elia. He burned her children. Yes, Varys replied, and perhaps that is the tragedy of dragons born in cages. They hate what they are. She stared out at the sea. The storm clouds rolled in, and with them came thoughts she'd never dared entertain before. What if her enemy wasn't a usurper? What if her enemy had worn the face of family all along? Far north, in a cold crypt beneath Winterfell, Jon Snow knelt beside a statue of Ned Stark and lit a candle. He didn't know about the scroll, not yet, but soon he would. And when he did, the war for the throne would no longer be between lions and wolves or dragons and men. It would be a war of blood, and Tywin Lannister's ghost would smile at last. The sea grew more restless with every passing day, waves slamming against the hull of Daenerys' ship like fists of the drowned gods. But inside her cabin it was quiet, too quiet. She held the scroll in trembling hands, reading the words again and again, hoping they'd change. They didn't. Tywin Lannister, the man who ordered the Mountain to butcher her niece and nephew, who sent gold-cloaked murderers into the nurseries of Elia's children. That man had the blood of her house, the blood of the dragon. She didn't want to believe it. She wanted to rip the parchment in half and toss it into the sea. But truth has a scent, thick, iron-like. It clings to the skin. Varys had shown her. The seals, the dates, the confirmation from old Pycelle's dying letters. Everything matched, even the timeline. 9 moons after Aerys visited Casterly Rock in his youth, just once and only briefly, Joanna Lannister gave birth to a son. "Do you know what this means?" she asked, staring not at Varys but through him. He bowed his head slightly, as if the weight of the secret pressed down on him too. "It means that Tywin's war against the Targaryens was a war against himself, or worse, against the parts of himself he despised." "No," she said coldly. "It means I was too late. The last of my house died shitting into a bowl, killed by his own twisted son. She didn't say his name, Tyrion, she couldn't. That night she drank wine, not for celebration, not for courage, but for clarity. The world she thought she understood had shifted again, and her list of enemies, real enemies, blurred with the ghosts of her own bloodline. Across the narrow sea and the smoking remains of King's Landing, Tyrion Lannister walked its ruins like a man already dead. Ash still clung to the bricks, and the scent of burnt flesh lingered in the air, refusing to die. Every step echoed guilt. Every collapsed alley whispered of children who once played there. He thought he had done the right thing, ringing the bells. Surrendering, urging Daenerys to spare the city. Instead, she had unleashed the dragon, and for that, he had turned against her. But what haunted him now wasn't the screams or the fire or the crumbling Red Keep. It was the words Varys had once spoken to him in passing, half muttered, almost like a joke. "You always thought Tywin was a lion. But what if he was something worse?" He dismissed it then. Everyone knew Varys loved riddles and half-truths. But now, after the raven from Braavos arrived, bearing a single black-sealed scroll with the dragon sigil burned into the wax, his hands shook as he read it. Aerys, Joanna, Tywin. He dropped the scroll into the fire, but it didn't feel like enough. He wanted to erase it from his bones. If Tywin Lannister had truly been a Targaryen, then what was he, the son of a madman, or the spawn of a lie that had poisoned all of Westeros? He found himself wandering to the ruins of the throne room. It was nothing now, just scorched stone and twisted metal. The Iron Throne had melted, a puddle of ruin where once kings bled themselves for power. Tyrion stood where it had once risen, imagining his father on it. Not as hand, but as king. And for a moment, just a moment, he could see it. Tywin with his golden armor and steel-cold eyes, ruling not through madness, but sheer iron will. That, more than anything, terrified him. Tywin would have ruled the 7 kingdoms with absolute order, and perhaps that was worse than chaos. In the Vale, Sansa Stark sat alone in the high tower of the Eyrie. The snow fell quietly, soft and undisturbed. She had received the same scroll. Maester Luwin's apprentice, now old and blind, had read it to her aloud, voice trembling with disbelief. She said nothing at first, just stared out the window, and remembered the way Tywin had looked at her during Coedicus cold, assessing, a man always calculating value. She remembered the Red Wedding, the way her family had died while Lannisters played songs of false peace. If he'd been a Targaryen, then his hatred wasn't personal. It was inborn, bred in dragonfire and sharpened in gold. But then she remembered Tyrion, the one Lannister, who hadn't treated her like a pawn. She didn't want to hate him, and yet the bloodline now cast its shadow over everything. The war wasn't over. It was just changing shape. Far beyond the wall, where strange winds blew and old things stirred, Bran Stark opened his eyes. He had seen it. The night Joanna had wept in her chambers. The way Aerys had laughed, whispering that he'd planted a seed in the west, a dragon in lion's skin, and now the truth was loose. Bran knew what would come next. Daenerys would never accept it. Jon wouldn't either. And Tyrion would be forced to choose what mattered more, his legacy or his blood. And in the shadows of all their choices, Tywin's ghost loomed like a curse that refused to die. The night Daenerys finally reached Dragonstone, the winds howled like wolves. The Black Castle rose like a claw out of the sea, its towers catching lightning as if daring the gods to strike them down. She didn't wait to rest. There was no sleep. In her blood, only fire. The council chamber was dimly lit, and the stone table still bore scars from the last war. Grey Worm stood beside her, loyal as ever, while Tyrion kept to the shadows like a man afraid of being seen, because he was. Daenerys laid the scroll out before them. "This is what your father was," she said quietly, eyes not leaving Tyrion's, "a dragon and a traitor." Tyrion didn't flinch. "If you believe that blood defines us, Your Grace, then I was doomed from birth. I believe blood explains." "Choices," she snapped. "You served him, admired him, you feared him, and now I know why." He sighed. "I feared what he could do, not who he was. There's a difference." Grey Worm stepped forward. "Does it matter? Tywin Lannister is dead." Daenerys turned to the table, fingers brushing over the carved shape of Westeros. "No, he's not. Not truly. He lives in the laws he shaped, in the people he broke, and in his legacy." Her voice hardened. "If he was a Targaryen, then that legacy is mine to erase." Tyrion paled. "And how do you plan to erase it?" "By burning it." In Old Town, the citadel buzzed with scandal. Ravens carried the news faster than wildfire ever could. Maesters, once forbidden from speaking of Aerys's lovers, now discussed them in open halls. Dust-covered tomes were dragged out. Old letters, cryptic diaries, confessions buried for decades. One parchment stood out, a faded note from Maester Walgrave, a recluse whose mind had withered before Robert's rebellion even ended. It read, "The dragon bred west, the lioness bore it. A child of gold, forged in fire. A king's shame in a lion's mane." The citadel had long been the domain of logic, but even logic trembled in the face of truth this ancient and dangerous. A conclave was summoned, and the question laid bare. Should the realm be told? Most voted no. Some argued it was already too late. But one young maester named Oren whispered, a name no one wanted to hear. What if Tyrion is the rightful heir? In the Riverlands, Arya Stark heard the rumors from a dying sellsword whose throat she slit for trying to rob a child. The man babbled nonsense about dragons in Lannister skin and kings made of lies. She wiped her blade clean and tried to forget it. But it stayed with her. The idea that the man who orchestrated the Red Wedding, the one whose name she'd recited before sleep, was kin to the family she had fought to protect, it made her sick. She sat by the trident that night, staring into the water. The moon lit her face in silver, and the coin Jack and Hagar had once given her felt heavier in her hand than ever before. She thought about killing Tyrion, thought about killing Daenerys too, but mostly she thought about killing legacy, not people, names, and she began to wonder if that was even possible. Meanwhile, in Dawn, Prince Quentyn Martell, barely surviving assassination attempts and still trying to reunify his shattered house, received a raven with only 7 words. Tywin Lannister was of dragon blood, he laughed bitterly. Of course he was. Only a Targaryen would murder children and call it honor. But it wasn't just hatred that stirred in him. It was opportunity. For the Martells had a score to settle. And now it seemed the dragon family owed them more than ever. Tywin had stolen their future. Now they would take his ghost and hang it. In the desert sun. Far away across the sea, Jon Snow sailed north again toward the wall. He hadn't heard the news yet. But the crows would come. They always did. And when he learned the truth about Tywin Targaryen, he wouldn't just question the war he fought in. He'd question the blood running through every noble house in Westeros. The wall loomed in the distance, like a frozen god, its blue-white surface reflecting the dull grey sky. Jon Snow stood at the prow of the ship, the cold wind cutting through him like whispers from the dead. Ghost paced beside him, tense, ears twitching. The North remembered. And Jon had come back to remember with it. He hadn't planned to return, not truly, but something had gnawed at his bones ever since he'd left Daenerys behind in the ruins of King's Landing. It wasn't guilt. It was something colder, something quieter, like the wind before a storm. When the raven came bearing the message from Sam, he read it in silence. Sam's words were clear, precise, but Jon could see the tremor in every line of ink. Tywin Lannister may have been Aerys's son, born of fire, raised in gold. If true, he was your kin. Our kin. Jon didn't reply. He folded the note and let the sea take it. It didn't matter. Blood never did, until it did. Inside Castle Black, the Black brothers gathered awkwardly. Most were new recruits, green boys who barely remembered the war, much less the king who'd broken it. They eyed Jon with awe, some with fear. But they all fell silent when he entered the hall. He didn't speak of dragons or thrones, he spoke of duty, of rebuilding. But Maester Harwin, old and half-blind, pulled him aside afterward and rasped, "You've seen what legacy does. It poisons. A man may bury the truth for years, but the snow always uncovers what the world tries to hide." Jon nodded but said nothing. Later that night, he stared into the fire, ghost curled against his feet, and finally whispered, "Tywin was the reason my brother and mother died. If he shared our blood, then maybe blood truly is a curse." Back in Dragonstone, Daenerys summoned Tyrion again. This time there were no advisors, no guards, just them, and the scroll laid open on the stone table like a wound. "You still serve." "Me?" she asked. "I do," Tyrion said softly. "Even if you hate me." She stared at him. "Tell me, if I asked you to renounce your name, would you?" Tyrion hesitated. "Which name?" "The one your father gave you." He smiled bitterly. "He never gave me anything but scorn." "Then you'll understand," she said, rising. "Why the world must forget him." Tyrion's smile faded. "And if the world refuses to forget?" Daenerys stepped toward the window, where Drogon's shadow passed over the courtyard like a whisper of death. "Then I will teach it to remember something else." He didn't ask what. He already knew. In King's Landing, still choked by ash, and silence, a new hand had risen. Gendry Baratheon, bastard of Robert. Now Lord of Storm's End, he'd been pulled into politics like a blacksmith dragged from his forge. And the scroll had found him too. He stared at the words. "Read them." Then threw a goblet across the room, roaring, "Lannister, Targaryen. What fucking difference does it make?" Ser Davos, calm as ever, stood nearby. "It matters, my lord, because the people believe it does." "And the people," Gendry spat, "don't care who rules them as long as their children don't burn alive." Davos nodded. "Then perhaps it's time someone ruled who remembered that." In Winterfell, the fire crackled in the great hall, and Bran Stark's eyes turned white once more. His mind flew through the past, into the chambers of Casterly, Rock, where Joanna wept into her sheets, into the Red Keep where Aerys, younger and sharper, whispered of lions and sons of fire. Into Tywin's study, where the lion read letters by candlelight, knowing full well the truth of his birth, and sealing it behind cold, golden silence. Bran returned to himself slowly. Arya was watching him. "Was it true?" she asked. "Was Tywin really one of them?" Bran nodded. "Yes, and worse. He knew." Arya's lips curled in disgust. "He killed his own blood." Bran looked at her then, his voice soft and eerie. "That's the legacy. Targaryen or Lannister, it makes no difference. All their blood leads to fire and death." Arya stood. "Then maybe the world needs someone who doesn't carry that blood at all." Bran didn't argue, because deep down, he knew she was right. Far to the east, in the quiet lands of Essos, word travelled slower. But even there, it reached old men who had once served kings, and young dreamers who still believed in fire-made flesh. One such dreamer was young Griff, or as he was called in whispers, Aegon Targaryen, the supposed son of Rhaegar. When he heard the news of Tywin's bloodline, he laughed. "So even the lion wore the dragon's mask," he said. "What a family of lies we are." And yet, he saw something else too. An opening, a new claim to destroy, a chance to seize what the old dragons had broken. The sky over Dragonstone cracked open with thunder. Daenerys stood on the highest terrace, cloaked in black, her silver hair dancing with the wind. Below, the waves beat against the rocks, but the storm within her raged louder. The revelation of Tywin's blood was not just a scandal. It was a legacy carved into the bones of Westeros, a bloodstain across the throne she still dreamt of. She had always believed her enemies were outsiders, usurpers, betrayers. But now she knew the truth. The greatest betrayal came from within her own bloodline. Tywin, the man who killed Aelia, Rhaenys, and baby Aegon, hadn't just killed kin, he was kin, and that meant the Targaryen line was forever tainted with the scent of Lannister steel. Grey Worm approached, armor glinting with rain. "They wait for." "You in the war room," he said. "The lords demand answers." "Let them wait," she replied coldly. She wasn't ready to answer anyone, not yet. Not until she decided what kind of Targaryen she would be. The kind who burned the world to cleanse it, or the kind who let the ghosts rule through her silence. At the same moment, in the cold corridors of Winterfell, Arya watched Bran as he sat. By the hearth, he barely moved now, not because of his broken legs, but because he was somewhere else more often than not, lost in time, or tied to it. "Tell me something," Arya said. "Why didn't you stop it?" "Stop what?" "The lie. Tywin. His bloodline. You knew. You see everything." Bran blinked slowly, like waking from a dream. "Some lies are too old to kill," he said, "and some truths only break things further." Arya rose. "I don't care about Targaryen blood or lion pride. But if you tell me Tyrion's one of them, I need to know. Can we trust him?" Bran didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Tyrion is more dangerous than he knows. Not because of his blood, but because he doesn't believe it defines him." Arya's hand drifted to needle. "That makes him a problem. People who don't fear their legacy usually repeat it." Tyrion stood in the old solar of Dragonstone, alone with his memories. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. His father's name echoed through his mind like a curse, each syllable twisting tighter around his thoughts. Targaryen. The word made his stomach churn. Was that why his father hated him so deeply? Because he reminded him of Aerys's madness? Of fire, not gold? Had Tywin looked into his mismatched eyes and seen the ghost of the king he loathed? He poured wine into his cup and tried to laugh, but it came out like a cough. "You're not your father," he muttered aloud. "You're not your blood." But even he wasn't sure anymore. The council summoned him again. They demanded his resignation, claimed his blood made him a threat. Some wanted his head, others simply wanted him gone. Only Daenerys had the final say, and she said nothing. She only looked at him the way Tywin used to look at traitors. In dawn, the fires of old vengeance blazed again. Prince Quentyn sent ravens to the Reach, to the Vale, and even to Braavos. The Martells would not let the death of Aelia and her children be buried beneath royal blood games. Now, with the truth out, the sands whispered of rebellion. A new movement stirred, one not for thrones but for reckoning. Quentyn called it Justice for Fire and Blood, and as it grew, one name became their rallying cry: Tywin the Tainted. In Old Town, Maester Orren watched flames consume ancient scrolls. The conclave had ordered, "Silence, burn the records, deny the bloodline." But Orren had copied the scroll before they could destroy it, and he sent it north, to Samwell Tarly, with one sentence underlined: "If blood makes kings, then monsters have ruled for centuries." And far beyond all of them, across the wall, Jon Snow stood on the icy ramparts. The wind howled. The dead were gone, but the cold remained. He had read Sam's copy of the scroll. He knew the truth, that the man who had orchestrated the deaths of his family, of his brother, his mother, his cousin, was of Targaryen blood. His blood. He closed his eyes, jaw clenched. Tywin Lannister. No Tywin Targaryen. What kind of world allowed a man like that to rule anything? And what did that mean for Jon, for Daenerys, for the whole cursed bloodline? The question wasn't who deserved the throne anymore. The question was, should anyone? The sky above King's Landing was black with smoke again, but not from dragonfire. Not this time. It was the smoke of revolt, of banners being torn down, statues toppled, of commoners screaming the name Tywin like a curse, like a ghost who'd come back to choke them all over again. The whispers had become wildfire. The truth had reached even the filthiest gutters. Tywin Lannister had been no lion, he'd been a dragon. And worse, he'd kept it secret. The Smallfolk didn't care about royal blood or ancient scrolls. They cared about what it meant. That every war, every famine, every child they'd lost had been part of a game played by a cursed family of tyrants in golden cloaks and silver crowns. The streets boiled, and in the Red Keep, Daenerys watched it, all from above, not with anger, not even fear, but a strange calm. A silence so deep it scared her more than rage ever had. She turned to Tyrion, who stood beside her like a man awaiting execution. "They don't want a queen," she said quietly. "They want justice." He nodded slowly. "And justice doesn't wear a crown." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "You could claim it," she said. "You are a Targaryen whether you want to be or not, and the world loves tragedy. The unwanted son of the most hated man, rising to break the cycle." Tyrion smiled bitterly. "And then what? I rule? With what army? With what soul?" "You have mine," she said, and for a second, just a second, he believed her. North of the neck, Jon Snow sat beneath the heart tree in Winterfell's God's Wood. The red leaves whispered secrets only the old gods knew. But even they were quiet today. He held the scroll in his hand, Sam's inked handwriting still smudged from his grip. Tywin was kin, Aerys's son. That made the man who slaughtered his brothers. Family who orchestrated the Red Wedding. Not just a monster. He was family. Jon closed his eyes, trying to banish the image. But it stuck like blood on Snow. Arya approached quietly. "You gonna cry?" she asked. He shook his head. "No." "Gonna kill someone?" "I should," he said. "But who's left? He's already dead." Arya sat beside him, arms crossed. "You know what this means, don't you? That we're all connected by blood. That blood doesn't mean shit anymore." He looked at her, startled. Arya stared at the weirwood. "Everyone keeps fighting for names, Targaryen, Stark, Lannister, but all it's ever brought is death. Maybe it's time someone burned all the names down." Jon didn't answer, because he wasn't sure she was wrong. In the Reach, a new voice rose. Not royal, not noble, but powerful. A woman named Marla Rivers, bastard of Highgarden. Her voice rang across the fields, into the hearts of the lowborn and forgotten. "They wear their names like armor," she cried to a crowd, "but all those names mean is who was allowed to hurt us and get away with it." The rebellion had begun, not against a king, not against a queen, but against legacy, against bloodlines, against history itself. Tyrion stood in Dragonstone's hall, flames flickering on his face. He'd made a choice, one he thought he'd never make. "I renounce my claim," he told Daenerys. "I am no Targaryen, I am no lion, I am no one's heir." She watched him unmoving. "You think that will save you?" "No," he said, "but maybe it'll save them." And with that he walked into the fire. Not to die, but to change. He emerged scarred, limping, with the skin of his hands blistered red. The people called it a miracle. He called it penance. Daenerys stood alone on the cliffs of Dragonstone one last time. Drogon circled high above, his wings carving holes into the clouds. Below, ships gathered, not hers, not enemies, something new, a fleet of no sigils, no houses, no crests, just people, tired of being ruled. She took one long breath and whispered, "Maybe fire really is the only answer." But she didn't mount Drogon. She turned and walked inside. She would not conquer, not anymore. She would disappear into the storm. And let the ashes settle without her. In the quiet halls of the citadel, Maester Orren finished writing the final entry of a hidden book. And thus, the blood of dragons, once thought divine, was revealed to be flawed. The truth did not free the realm. It cracked it. And in the breaking, something unexpected was born. Not a new king, but a question. Do we need them at all? He closed the book and locked it away, not to hide the truth, but to give the world time to decide whether it was ready for it.